My name is Jessica Reynolds, and at 34, I never expected to be caught between family loyalty and doing the right thing. When I bought my small apartment building in Boston with my inheritance, I thought I was securing my future, not setting myself up for the biggest family showdown of my life. I had carefully selected my tenants, including Marcus, a kind-hearted school counselor who always paid on time. Then last month, my mother showed up unannounced with her bombshell announcement: "Your spare apartment is perfect for Brian's family." The problem? There was no spare apartment. Before I tell you how this family drama exploded, make sure to like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to pushy relatives who think they're entitled to your things. And let me know in the comments if you've ever been expected to solve someone else's problems at your own expense. My journey to property ownership began with heartbreak. 3 years ago, my grandmother passed away, leaving me a modest inheritance. While most people might have used that money for travel or a new car, I remembered all the conversations Grandma and I had about financial security. "Real estate, Jessica," she would say, tapping her temple with a knowing smile. "It's the one thing they aren't making any more of." Grandma had always believed in me in a way my parents never did. While my younger brother Brian was the golden child who could do no wrong despite his constant financial troubles, I was the responsible one who was expected to clean up messes but rarely praised for preventing them. Grandma saw that dynamic and made sure I knew she noticed my efforts. So when I received that inheritance check, I knew exactly what I would do. After extensive research and working with a realtor who specialized in investment properties, I found a small 4-unit building in a transitioning neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid brick construction with good bones and reasonable property taxes. The previous owner was retiring to Florida and willing to accept my offer, which was slightly below asking but all I could afford. The day I signed those papers and received the keys, I felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This was mine. Not something my parents had arranged or helped with, but something I had researched, negotiated, and purchased entirely on my own. The building came with 2 existing tenants who had solid rental histories. I needed to fill the remaining 2 units, and I approached the tenant selection process with meticulous care. I wasn't just looking for people who could pay, I wanted tenants who would respect the property and contribute to a sense of community in the building. That's how Marcus Wilson came into my life. When he applied for one of the vacant apartments 2 years ago, his application stood out immediately. At 42, he had a stable job as a high school counselor, excellent credit, and impeccable references. During our initial meeting, I learned he was a widower who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. There was a quiet dignity about him as he mentioned this fact without seeking pity. He was rebuilding his life and wanted a peaceful place to call home. "I'm not much for parties," he told me with a gentle smile. "Most evenings you'll find me reading or grading papers. On weekends, I volunteer with at-risk teens at the community center." I knew immediately he would be a perfect fit for the building. Over the next 2 years, Marcus proved to be everything his application had promised and more. He was unfailingly polite, promptly reported maintenance issues before they became serious problems, and even helped elderly Mrs. Gonzalez from the first floor carry her groceries up the steps when the elevator was being serviced. Our landlord-tenant relationship evolved into a friendly acquaintanceship. We weren't best friends by any stretch, but there was a mutual respect between us. Sometimes we'd chat in the hallway or share gardening tips for the small plots behind the building. Once, during a power outage in winter, Marcus organized an impromptu potluck in the building's common area where all the tenants shared whatever perishable food they had. It was one of those rare moments of urban community that reminded me why I'd wanted to own a building in the first place. While my professional life was flourishing, family gatherings remained an exercise in patience. My mother Eleanor never missed an opportunity to mention Brian's latest accomplishment while glossing over his many financial missteps. Despite being 2 years younger than me, my brother had always been positioned as the family success story, at least until his achievements were examined with any scrutiny. Brian had a pattern that had repeated since high school: grand ambitions, initial success, then careless mistakes that led to spectacular failures. He'd started 3 businesses that had folded within a year. He'd bought and sold 2 houses, each time promising it was his forever home only to move on when mortgage payments became inconvenient. Through it all, my parents, especially my mother, continued to celebrate his entrepreneurial spirit while dismissing my steady career progression and investment strategy as playing it too safe. The most recent family gathering had been my cousin's wedding 2 months ago. Brian had shown up in a brand new luxury car that I later learned was leased at an exorbitant monthly rate. My mother had beamed with pride as he valet parked it, whispering to her sister, "He's doing so well in real estate these days." Meanwhile, I had arrived in my reliable 5-year-old sedan that was fully paid for, wearing a dress I had owned for several seasons rather than bought specifically for the occasion. My mother had greeted me with a perfunctory hug and a once-over of my outfit before asking, "Still driving that old thing, huh?" That evening, Brian had pulled me aside after a few too many champagnes. "You know, Jess," he'd slurred slightly, "you should let me manage that building of yours. I could double your return in 6 months." I had smiled tightly and changed the subject. Based on Brian's track record, he'd more likely sell my building at a loss to fund his next great idea, leaving my tenants homeless in the process. Despite these frustrations, I had established a peaceful life balance. My small property management business was growing as I had taken on 2 additional buildings for other owners who appreciated my attention to detail. I had a social circle separate from my family, a dating life that was casual but satisfying, and the quiet pride of building something sustainable. Then my mother showed up at my door one Tuesday afternoon in April, and everything changed. The knock on my door came as I was reviewing applications for a unit that would be vacant next month. My current tenant had accepted a job in another state and given proper notice, exactly the kind of respectful behavior I appreciated. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to find my mother standing in the hallway, her expression a familiar mix of determination and disapproval. "You didn't answer my calls," she said, brushing past me into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. "I was planning to call you back this evening," I replied, which was true. "I've been busy with work." My mother surveyed my living room with the critical eye she always employed in my spaces. "You really should get some new throw pillows, Jessica. Those are looking dated." I bit back a retort about her outdated parenting techniques and simply asked, "Is everything okay? It's not like you to drop by unannounced." She settled herself on my couch, arranging her designer handbag beside her. "It's Brian. There's been a situation." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. I'd heard that situation euphemism many times throughout our lives, usually preceding some catastrophe of Brian's making that everyone else would need to fix. "What kind of situation?" I asked cautiously, taking a seat across from her. "They're losing the house," she said, her voice dropping dramatically. "The bank is foreclosing next month. They've fallen behind on payments, and with the children." Her voice trailed off for maximum emotional effect. I waited for more details, knowing they would reveal the true nature of the situation. "Brian lost his job 3 months ago. That real estate firm he was with, they downsized. It wasn't his fault at all, of course. And he's had a few setbacks, trying to get back on his feet." "Setbacks?" I prompted. My mother looked uncomfortable. "Well, he made some investments that didn't quite pan out." "Gambling," I translated flatly. This wasn't the first time Brian's investments had turned out to be poker games or sports betting. "Don't be judgmental, Jessica. He was trying to provide for his family. Amanda hasn't been able to find full-time work since Lily was born, and with Dylan starting that expensive soccer program." I felt a familiar weight settling onto my shoulders. My niece and nephew, aged 8 and 10, were innocent participants in their parents' financial chaos. I loved those kids, even though I saw them less frequently than I would have liked due to the strained relationship with my brother. "That's tough," I said, genuinely sympathetic to their situation but already sensing where this conversation was heading. "Have they looked into rental assistance programs? Or maybe Amanda's parents could help?" My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Amanda's parents are in that tiny condo in Florida now. There's no room for a family of 4. And government programs take too long, they need somewhere to go next month. She paused, leaning forward with intent. Which is actually why I'm here. Here it comes, I thought. Your apartment building, you have that spare unit, don't you? The one on the second floor? I frowned. There is no spare unit, Mom. All 4 apartments are occupied. She gave me a look of impatience. The one with that single man. The teacher or something? Marcus? He's a school counselor, and yes, he rents one of the units. Has for 2 years now. My mother nodded as if I'd just proven her point. Exactly. He's just one person in a 2-bedroom apartment. Brian needs that space for his family. It's perfect. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Mom, that's not a spare apartment. It's Marcus's home. He has a lease. She waved her hand again, that dismissive gesture that had infuriated me since childhood. Leases can be broken, Jessica. This is family we're talking about. Your brother, your niece, and nephew need a roof over their heads. Marcus needs a roof over his head too, I countered, feeling a rush of protective indignation. He's a good tenant who pays on time and takes care of the property. I can't just kick him out. Of course you can. You own the building. She said this as if explaining something very simple to a small child. Give him, what do they call it? 30 days notice? Tell him it's a family emergency. That's not how it works, Mom. Massachusetts has strong tenant protections. I can't evict someone without cause just because I want the apartment. My mother's expression hardened. The cause is that your family needs help. Blood is thicker than water, Jessica. That's not a legal cause for eviction, I said, my voice rising slightly. And even if it were, I wouldn't do that to Marcus. It would be wrong. Wrong? My mother's eyebrows shot up. What's wrong is letting your brother's children become homeless while you protect some stranger who pays you rent. He's not just some stranger, I insisted. He's a person who signed a legal agreement with me, who has built his life in that apartment. He has rights. And what about family rights, she demanded. What about your obligations to the people who have known and loved you your entire life? I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. I understand Brian's family is in a difficult situation. I'm happy to help them look for affordable housing, maybe even co-sign on a lease somewhere else. But I will not kick Marcus out of his home. My mother stood abruptly, grabbing her handbag with more force than necessary. I never thought I'd see the day when my own daughter would choose money over family. This isn't about money. Isn't it? You're more concerned about your rental income than your own niece and nephew having a safe place to live. That's not fair, I protested. This is about treating people ethically. About honoring my commitments. Your commitment should be to your family first, she snapped. I raised you better than this, Jessica. Or I thought I did. She moved toward the door, then turned back with a look I recognized from countless childhood confrontations, the look that preceded her most effective guilt trips. I won't tell Brian you refused to help his children. It would break his heart to know his sister could have prevented their homelessness but chose not to. I'll just tell him you're thinking about it. With that parting shot, she swept out of my apartment, leaving me standing in my living room, shaking with a mixture of anger and anxiety. After she left, I paced my apartment for nearly an hour, replaying the conversation and feeling the familiar guilt she was so skilled at instilling. Was I being selfish? Should family indeed come first, regardless of other commitments? I thought about Marcus, his quiet dignity and reliability. I thought about the legal and ethical implications of trying to remove him from his home. Then I thought about Dylan and Lily, my niece and nephew who deserved stability and security regardless of their parents' poor decisions. That night, I barely slept, torn between the weight of family expectations and my own sense of right and wrong. By morning, my phone was filled with text messages, not just from my mother, but from 2 aunts and an uncle, all expressing their disappointment in my refusal to help family in need. The campaign had begun, and I was once again cast in my familiar family role, the selfish one who needed to be pressured into compliance. The text messages started as a trickle and quickly became a flood. By the end of the first week, nearly every member of my extended family had contacted me to express their opinion on what I should do with my property. My Aunt Linda wrote, "Family should always come first, Jessica. I'm surprised you'd even hesitate." My cousin Michael, who had never shown interest in my life before, suddenly texted, "Dude, it's your brother. Hook him up." Even my father, who typically stayed out of conflicts between my mother and me, left a voicemail, "Jessica, your mother is very upset. Maybe you could just talk to this tenant fellow and see if he'd be willing to move." For the family. What none of them understood, or cared to understand, was that this wasn't as simple as hooking up my brother. This was about potentially making a man homeless to solve a problem my brother had created through his own poor choices. 3 days after my mother's visit, I received a call from Amanda, Brian's wife. We had always had a cordial if somewhat distant relationship. She was a former dental hygienist who had given up her career when the kids were born, planning to return once they were in school. Somehow, that return had never materialized. "Jessica," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I wouldn't call if we weren't desperate. The bank is being so unreasonable. We offered partial payments, but they won't accept anything less than the full amount." I listened as she detailed their financial situation, which was even worse than my mother had indicated. They were not just behind on mortgage payments, they had maxed out credit cards, had a car at risk of repossession, and owed money to several personal lenders who I strongly suspected were less than reputable. "What happened, Amanda?" I asked gently. "Last I heard, Brian was doing well at the real estate firm." There was a pause, then a sigh. "He was, at first. But then he started borrowing against his commissions to invest in opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" Another pause. "Sports betting, mostly. He was sure he had a system. For a while, he was winning, and we were doing great. That's when we bought the new car and redid the kitchen. But then he hit a losing streak, and things spiraled quickly." It was the story of Brian's life, repeated once more with higher stakes. Initial success, overconfidence, poor decisions, then collapse. "Amanda, I'm truly sorry about your situation. But you have to understand that I can't just evict Marcus to give you his apartment." "Your mother said it was just a matter of giving notice," Amanda persisted. "She said you had the legal right as the owner." I suppressed a surge of frustration at my mother's misrepresentation. "That's not how rental law works in Massachusetts. I can only evict for specific reasons like non-payment or lease violations. Marcus has done neither." "But there must be something. What if we paid more rent than he does?" "That's not the point, Amanda. It would be unethical, and illegal, to evict someone who's done nothing wrong just because someone else offers more money." The conversation ended with Amanda in tears and me feeling like the villain in my family's drama, despite knowing I was standing on solid ethical ground. The pressure intensified the following weekend when I discovered, via social media, that my mother had organized a family meeting at her house, one to which I had not been invited. Photos showed my aunts, uncles, cousins, and of course Brian and his family, all gathered in my parents' living room with serious expressions. I called my cousin Sarah, the only family member who hadn't reached out to pressure me, and asked what had happened at the meeting. "You don't want to know, Jess," she said reluctantly. "I think I need to." She sighed. "Your mom presented it as a brainstorming session to help Brian's family, but it quickly turned into a Jessica bashing festival. Your mom told everyone you have an empty apartment that you're refusing to let family use." "It's not empty. Marcus lives there." "I know that. I tried to point it out, but your mom kept saying he's just a tenant and that you could easily ask him to leave." Sarah paused. "The worst part is they've already told Brian's kids they'll be moving into your building. Dylan was talking about which bedroom would be his." My stomach dropped. "They what?" "Yeah, your mom has basically promised them the apartment." She's convinced you'll come around once you realize what's at stake. I was speechless with anger and disbelief. Not only had my family mischaracterized my position and my legal options, but they had also given false hope to my niece and nephew, setting me up to be the one to crush those hopes. The situation came to a head 3 days later at my parents' house, where I'd been summoned for a small family dinner. I'd agreed to go, hoping to set the record straight about my building and the legal realities of tenant law. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Not only were my parents and Brian's family there, but also 2 of my mother's sisters and their husbands, all of whom greeted me with cool stares. My mother had prepared all of Brian's favorite foods, none of which I particularly enjoyed, a subtle but pointed message about who mattered in this family dynamic. The tension was palpable as we sat down to eat, with Dylan and Lily fidgeting uncomfortably, clearly sensing the adult undercurrents. Dylan has already picked out which bedroom he wants in the apartment, my mother announced after an uncomfortable silence, as if this settled the matter. I set down my fork. There's been a misunderstanding. I never said Brian's family could move into the building. But you will, my mother said with false brightness. Once you've had time to think about it properly. I have thought about it, I said firmly. And it's not possible. Marcus has a legal lease, and I have no grounds to evict him. Brian spoke up for the first time. Come on, Jess. You're the landlord. Landlords find ways to get rid of tenants all the time. The casual immorality of his statement stunned me. Are you suggesting I do something illegal and unethical to make your family's problem go away? I'm suggesting you help your family, he shot back. But I guess that's too much to ask of my successful sister who loves to lord her financial stability over everyone. That's completely unfair, I protested. I've worked hard for what I have, and I've made careful decisions to build security. Something you might consider trying. The table erupted into raised voices. My mother accused me of always thinking I was better than everyone else. My father mumbled about family duty. My aunts chimed in about how they would never treat family this way. Through it all, I noticed Lily and Dylan shrinking into their seats, eyes wide with distress. They were the true victims here, not only of their parents' financial irresponsibility but now of this toxic family dynamic that was using them as emotional pawns. In that moment, looking at my niece and nephew, I almost gave in. Almost said I would find a way to make it work, just to end their discomfort and uncertainty. The pull of family obligation and the weight of their expectation was almost overwhelming. Then my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Marcus, responding to a routine message I'd sent all tenants about upcoming maintenance. His message was courteous and appreciative, ending with thanks for the advance notice and a mention of how much he valued the stability and care I brought to managing the building. The contrast between his respectful communication and my family's emotional manipulation couldn't have been starker. It strengthened my resolve to stand firm. As the argument continued around me, I made a decision. I would not be bullied into unethical behavior, not even for family. There had to be another solution for Brian's family that didn't involve trampling on Marcus's rights. The dinner ended abruptly when Brian announced he was going to check out his new place anyway, despite my objections. He stood, grabbing his car keys. Brian, please don't, I said, following him to the door. You're setting yourself up for disappointment and making this situation worse. He ignored me, marching out to his car with Amanda and the kids trailing behind him. With a sinking feeling, I followed them, knowing this confrontation was about to escalate to a new level. I arrived at my building just minutes after Brian's family, having driven directly from my parents' house. As I pulled up, I could see Brian standing in front of the entrance, gesturing emphatically to Amanda and pointing up at the windows as if already planning furniture placement. Dylan and Lily stood slightly apart, Dylan kicking at a crack in the sidewalk while Lily clutched her well-worn stuffed rabbit, a sign she was feeling anxious. My heart ached for them, caught in the middle of adult problems they couldn't possibly understand. I parked and approached them, steeling myself for another confrontation. Brian, this has gone far enough, I said firmly. You cannot move into Marcus's apartment. It's not available, and it's not going to become available just because you want it to be. Brian turned to me, his expression smug. Nice building, Jess. Smaller than I expected, but the location's decent. We can work with it. His entitled tone made something snap inside me. Did you hear anything I just said? This isn't happening. Mom says you'll come around, he replied with infuriating confidence. You always do. Remember when you didn't want to lend me money for my first business? You gave in eventually. I remembered all too well. I'd lent him $5,000 that was never repaid, despite multiple promises. It was a pattern that had repeated throughout our adult lives, Brian asking, me refusing, family pressure mounting, me eventually giving in, then regretting it when Brian failed to fulfill his obligations. That was different. This isn't about money, it's about someone's home. I won't make Marcus homeless to solve your problems. Brian scoffed. He's a single guy. He can find another place easily. You don't know anything about his situation, I countered. And it doesn't matter. He has a legal right to stay in his home. Just then, the building's front door opened, and Marcus himself emerged. He was in running clothes, clearly heading out for exercise, and stopped short when he saw the group of us on the sidewalk. Oh, hello Jessica, he said, looking curiously at the others. Before I could speak, Brian stepped forward with his hand outstretched. Brian Reynolds. Jessica's brother. His tone was friendly but assessing, as if sizing up competition. Marcus politely shook his hand, glancing at me with a question in his eyes. This is Marcus Wilson, one of my tenants, I said, feeling incredibly awkward. Marcus, this is my brother and his family, Amanda, Dylan, and Lily. Marcus smiled warmly at the children. Nice to meet you all. Are you visiting for the day? An uncomfortable silence fell. I opened my mouth to explain, but Brian spoke first. Actually, we're checking out our new place. We'll be moving into the building soon. Marcus looked confused. Oh? Is Unit 4 becoming available? I thought Mrs. Chin renewed her lease last month. Not Unit 4, Brian said pointedly. Unit 2. Your unit. The shock and confusion on Marcus's face made me want to sink into the ground with embarrassment. I don't understand, he said, looking to me for clarification. Nothing has been decided, I said quickly, giving Brian a warning glare. My brother's family is looking for a new place, but there are no vacancies in this building. Brian laughed dismissively. Come on, Jess. Don't be so formal. We're family. He turned to Marcus. We've hit a rough patch, and Jessica's going to help us out by letting us take over your lease. I'm sure you understand, family first, right? Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to concern. I see, he said carefully. Well, I should continue with my run. Nice meeting you all. He nodded politely and jogged away, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. I was furious. How dare you put him in that position? And how dare you put me in this position? You have no right to tell him or anyone else that you're taking his apartment. As we argued, I noticed Brian's car parked awkwardly, with the right front tire at an odd angle, clearly flat. In the midst of our heated exchange, I saw Marcus jogging back toward us. He had only gone half a block before apparently noticing the flat tire. Without hesitation, he approached Brian. I noticed you have a flat, he said. I have a portable air compressor in my apartment if you need it. It might at least get you to a service station. Brian looked taken aback by the offer of help from the very person whose home he was trying to claim. Yeah. That would be helpful. Marcus nodded and disappeared into the building, returning minutes later with the compressor. While Brian connected it to his tire, Marcus chatted casually with Dylan and Lily, showing genuine interest when Dylan mentioned his soccer team and complimenting Lily's stuffed rabbit. The children, who had been tense and withdrawn moments before, visibly relaxed in Marcus's kind presence. After the tire was inflated enough for temporary use, Marcus offered directions to the nearest service center. They're honest mechanics there. They won't try to sell you services you don't need. As Marcus waved goodbye and continued his run, Brian stood watching him with an unreadable expression. He seems nice, Amanda said quietly. He is nice, I replied pointedly. He's also a human being with rights, not an inconvenience to be removed. Brian didn't respond, but I noticed something in his expression had changed, perhaps the beginning of doubt about the rightness of his demands. Later that evening, as I was returning from walking my dog, I ran into Marcus in the building's small courtyard. He was sitting on a bench, reading a book in the last of the day's light. Marcus, about earlier, I began, feeling I owed him an explanation. I'm so sorry you were put in that awkward position. I want you to know that your tenancy is secure. No one is asking you to leave. He closed his book and gave me a small smile. I appreciate that, Jessica. I gathered there was some family pressure happening there. That's putting it mildly, I sighed, sitting down beside him. My brother's family is losing their house to foreclosure, and somehow that's become my problem to solve. Family dynamics can be complicated, he offered sympathetically. Something about his gentle understanding opened a floodgate, and I found myself sharing more than I'd intended, about the pattern of enabling in my family, about always being the responsible one who was nevertheless taken for granted. Marcus listened attentively, offering no judgment. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. After my wife died, he said, I learned a lot about the difference between helping and enabling. Well-meaning friends and family wanted to take care of everything for me. They meant well, but what I really needed was to learn how to stand on my own again. He went on to share how the 3 years since his wife's death had been a journey of rebuilding, of finding strength he didn't know he had. The hardest part wasn't the grief itself, he reflected. It was learning to set boundaries with people who thought they knew what was best for me, who wanted to fix everything when what I needed was just support while I fixed things myself. His words resonated deeply. Wasn't that exactly what my family needed, support while they solved their own problems, rather than someone else solving the problems for them? Marcus mentioned his volunteer work with troubled teens at the community center, explaining how many of them came from homes where they never witnessed healthy problem-solving. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is not rescue them, he said. It's showing them they have the strength to rescue themselves. As our conversation wound down and we prepared to return to our respective apartments, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced since this whole situation began. The contrast between Marcus's dignity and self-reliance and my brother's entitled expectations couldn't have been starker. I realized I had spent my entire life enabling my brother's poor choices under the guise of family loyalty. By always providing a safety net, I had helped create the very dynamic that led to this current crisis. That night, I drafted a clear, kind but firm email to my family. I explained that while I cared deeply about Brian's family's well-being, I would not be evicting Marcus to provide them housing. I offered alternative ways I could help, connecting them with rental assistance programs, helping them search for affordable apartments, even offering to pay the security deposit and first month's rent somewhere else. What I would not do, I wrote, was compromise my ethics, break the law, or continue participating in a pattern that ultimately harmed everyone involved. My finger hovered over the send button for several long moments. I knew this email would unleash a fresh wave of family anger and guilt trips. I knew I would be cast, once again, as the selfish villain who refused to sacrifice for family. I hit send anyway. And with that simple action, I felt both terrified and strangely liberated, as if I had finally given myself permission to establish the boundaries I had needed my entire life. 3 days after sending my email, I was reviewing property maintenance records in my home office when the buzzer for my building's front door sounded. Through the intercom, I heard my mother's voice. Jessica, it's your mother. Let us in. The pluralist sent a warning signal through me. I buzzed them in and opened my apartment door, steeling myself for whatever was coming. I was not prepared for the sight that greeted me in the hallway moments later. My mother was leading a procession that included Brian, Amanda, Dylan, Lily, and, most shocking of all, 4 large suitcases and several boxes. What is this? I asked, though the answer was painfully obvious. We've come to move in, my mother announced as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The bank has expedited the foreclosure, and Brian's family needs to be out by tomorrow. I stood in my doorway, blocking their entry. Move in where, exactly? Into the apartment, of course, my mother replied with exaggerated patience. We've discussed this, Jessica. Yes, we have, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. And I made it very clear in my email that Marcus's apartment is not available. I offered several other ways I could help. We don't need other help, Brian interjected, setting down the box he was carrying. We need a place to live. You have one. Problem solved. No, problem not solved, I countered. That apartment is Marcus's home. He has a legal lease. He pays his rent on time. He cannot and will not be evicted without cause. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice to a dramatic whisper. Jessica, look at your niece and nephew. Look at them. Are you really going to make them homeless? I glanced at Dylan and Lily, who stood uncomfortably beside a suitcase, clearly embarrassed by the adult confrontation happening around them. My heart ached for them, but I reminded myself that I was not the one putting them in this position. They don't have to be homeless, I said firmly. I've researched several family housing options that have immediate availability. I've offered to pay the deposit and first month's rent. I've sent all of that information to you, which you've apparently ignored. Those places are in terrible neighborhoods, Amanda protested. The schools are awful. They're in perfectly decent neighborhoods, I corrected her. The main difference is they're not as upscale as what you're used to. Sometimes financial setbacks require lifestyle adjustments. Brian's face darkened. So you're punishing us for having financial problems? Real sisterly, Jess. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm refusing to punish Marcus for problems he had nothing to do with. I took a deep breath. The options I've offered are generous. Many people in your situation don't have family who can provide that kind of help. We don't want your charity, my mother snapped. We want you to do the right thing for family. Just then, the elevator doors opened, and Marcus stepped out, returning from his workday. He stopped short at the sight of the family confrontation and the luggage piled in the hallway. Oh, excuse me, he said awkwardly, clearly realizing he had walked into a tense situation. An uncomfortable silence fell. Marcus nodded politely and moved to walk past us toward his apartment door. My mother stepped into his path. Mr. Wilson, she said, with the false sweetness I recognized from countless uncomfortable social situations throughout my childhood. We were just discussing your apartment. I'm sure Jessica has mentioned our family situation to you. Marcus glanced at me uncertainly. She mentioned her brother's family was looking for housing, yes. Well, we found the perfect solution, my mother continued. Jessica has another building she manages where she can find you a unit, and this apartment will go to her brother's family. Isn't that wonderful? The blatant lie left me momentarily speechless. I managed to sputter, that is absolutely not true. I never said any such thing. Marcus looked between us, clearly uncomfortable but maintaining his composure. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I have no plans to vacate my apartment, and Jessica has assured me my tenancy is secure. My mother's expression hardened. Young man, this is a family matter. Surely you wouldn't stand in the way of keeping children from becoming homeless? Marcus straightened his shoulders slightly. With all due respect, ma'am, this is my home. I signed a legal lease, and I have rights as a tenant that are protected by law. Laws can be worked around, my mother dismissed. Not ethically, they can't, Marcus replied calmly. Now, if you'll excuse me. He moved to step around her. My mother grabbed his arm, causing him to stiffen. Don't you have any decency? Any compassion? These children need a home. I rushed forward. Let go of him, Mom. This is completely inappropriate. Marcus gently but firmly removed my mother's hand from his arm. I understand this is a difficult situation for your family, he said with remarkable restraint. But I'm not the cause of it, and losing my home won't be the solution. With a nod to me, he unlocked his door and disappeared inside. The hallway fell silent for a moment. Then my mother turned to me, her face flushed with anger. That's the kind of person you're choosing over your own family? A selfish young man who won't make a small sacrifice to help children? The unfairness of her characterization was the final straw. Years of suppressed feelings about my family's treatment of me came rushing to the surface. Marcus is one of the most decent people I know, I said, my voice shaking. He works with troubled teens, volunteers in the community, and treats everyone with respect and kindness. And none of that should even matter, because he has a legal right to his home that I will not violate. I turned to Brian and Amanda. I'm truly sorry for your situation, but this ambush was manipulative and unfair, especially to your children. I've offered several ways I can help you, none of which involve making an innocent person homeless. Where are we supposed to go, Jessica? Amanda asked, tears welling in her eyes. I've sent you information on 3 available apartments in your budget, all of which allow immediate move-in with the deposit I've offered to pay, I replied. Or you could stay with Mom and Dad temporarily while you get back on your feet. My mother scoffed. They can't stay with us. We don't have the space. You have a 4-bedroom house, I pointed out. Brian and Amanda could take the guest room, and the kids could use Brian's old room and the den. It would be a tight fit, but it would be temporary. The look on my mother's face made it clear that while she was willing to pressure me into disrupting my business and making Marcus homeless, she was unwilling to experience even temporary inconvenience herself. That's not practical, she dismissed. Your father uses the den for his hobbies. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. So Dad's hobby space is more important than Marcus's home? Than my professional ethics and legal obligations? That's what you're saying. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken only by Lily's quiet sniffling. The poor child was clearly distressed by the tension and arguing. This conversation is over, I said finally. I will not be evicting Marcus. I have offered several other ways I can help, and those offers still stand. But this, I gestured to the luggage, this ends now. My mother drew herself up to her full height. If that's your final word, then you've made your choice. You've chosen a stranger over your family. No, Mom. I've chosen ethics, legality, and basic human decency. The fact that you can't see the difference says a lot about why we're in this situation to begin with. She turned to Brian and Amanda. Come. We're leaving. My daughter has made it clear where her loyalties lie, and it's not with her family. As they gathered their luggage, my mother delivered her parting shot. Don't call us when you realize what a mistake you've made. As far as I'm concerned, you're no longer part of this family. The words cut deep, despite the manipulation behind them. I watched as they loaded their belongings back into their cars, with Dylan and Lily casting confused glances back at me. I raised my hand in a small wave to them, which they tentatively returned before being ushered into the car by their mother. After they drove away, I returned to my apartment and collapsed onto my couch, emotionally drained. Tears came then, tears of anger, hurt, and relief all mixed together. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had stood firm against my family's manipulation, but the cost felt enormous. I wondered if my mother's declaration of disownment would be temporary or permanent. I wondered if I would lose my relationship with Dylan and Lily, who had done nothing wrong. Most of all, I wondered if I had done the right thing, despite knowing intellectually that I had. That night was one of the longest of my life, filled with doubt and second-guessing. But somewhere around 3 a.m., as I finally drifted toward sleep, I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I had honored my own values rather than capitulating to keep the peace. Whatever came next, I would face it with the knowledge that I had acted with integrity. The week following the confrontation with my family was one of the loneliest I'd ever experienced. My mother had apparently made good on her threat to cut me off, as none of my usual text messages or calls from family members came through. My father, who sometimes reached out separately from my mother, remained silent as well. I threw myself into work, taking on extra property inspections and maintenance coordination to keep my mind occupied. But evenings were difficult, filled with a heavy silence that even my favorite shows couldn't dispel. On the third evening, I returned home to find a covered dish outside my apartment door with a note, "Thought you might like some lasagna. It always helps me on rough days. Marcus." The simple kindness brought tears to my eyes. I hadn't told him about being cut off by my family, but he had clearly sensed my distress. The lasagna was delicious, clearly homemade, and there was enough for several meals. Over the next few days, I noticed other small gestures from him, a book left by my door that he thought I might enjoy, an invitation to join a small building community garden project he was starting in the back courtyard. Never intrusive, always respectful, just small reminders that I wasn't as alone as I felt. About a week and a half after the confrontation, I was surprised by a knock on my door. When I opened it, I found an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair and familiar eyes, my Aunt Rita, my mother's youngest sister, whom I hadn't seen in over a year. "Aunt Rita," I said, genuinely surprised. "What brings you here?" She smiled warmly. Can't an aunt visit her niece without an interrogation? Though I admit, I come with ulterior motives involving coffee and conversation. I invited her in, quickly making us coffee while she settled on my couch, looking around my apartment with interest. "I like what you've done with the place," she commented. "It's very you, practical but warm." "Thank you," I replied, bringing over our mugs. "But somehow I doubt you came all this way to discuss my decor choices." She laughed. Direct as ever. "You're right, of course." Her expression grew more serious. "I've heard all about the drama with Brian's housing situation, your mother's version, anyway. But I've known you since you were born, Jessica, and I've never known you to be unreasonable or uncaring. So I thought I'd hear your side." I was touched by her willingness to seek out my perspective rather than simply accepting my mother's narrative. Over the next hour, I explained everything, the legal and ethical issues with evicting Marcus, the alternative help I had offered, the ambush with the luggage, and finally, my mother's declaration that I was no longer family. Aunt Rita listened attentively, nodding occasionally and asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she sighed deeply. "This doesn't surprise me, unfortunately," she said. "Your mother has always had a blind spot when it comes to Brian. And she's never understood the concept of boundaries." "That's putting it mildly," I agreed. Aunt Rita set down her coffee mug and leaned forward slightly. "Did you know your grandmother, my mother, faced a similar situation when we were young?" I shook my head, surprised. "No, she never mentioned anything like that. It was with your Uncle David, Mom's brother. He was charming and ambitious but chronically irresponsible with money, much like Brian. When his business failed for the third time, he expected Mom to let him move into the small rental property she owned as her retirement investment. The parallel was startling. What did she do?" "She refused," Aunt Rita said simply. "She offered to help him find other housing, even loaned him some money for a deposit elsewhere, but she wouldn't displace her tenants. The family was furious with her, my father, their other siblings, everyone took David's side." "That must have been hard for her," I said softly, thinking of my grandmother in a new light. "It was. There was a family rift that lasted nearly 2 years. But Grandma stood her ground because she believed it was the right thing to do. And you know what? Eventually, David found his footing. He had to work harder than he ever had before, but he built something sustainable because he couldn't rely on family to bail him out." She reached across and squeezed my hand. "I see a lot of Grandma in you, Jessica. That same quiet strength, that same moral compass. She would be proud of you for standing your ground." Her words were a balm to my bruised spirit. "Thank you for telling me that story. I've been second-guessing myself, wondering if I'm a terrible person for not helping Brian's family." "But you did offer help," Aunt Rita pointed out. "Just not the exact help they demanded, on their terms only. There's a difference between refusing to help and refusing to enable." We talked for another hour, with Aunt Rita sharing more stories about my grandmother that I'd never heard, stories that revealed a woman of principle who had faced family criticism with grace and conviction. By the time she left, promising to stay in touch regardless of what my mother thought, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The following Saturday, Marcus knocked on my door with an unexpected invitation. "I'm volunteering at a community event today, sort of a resource fair for teens and families. We could use another pair of hands if you're free." No pressure, of course. Normally, I might have declined, preferring to catch up on work. But the isolation of recent weeks had made me realize how much I needed human connection. "Actually, that sounds great," I told him. "Just give me a few minutes to get ready." The event was held at a local community center and brought together various organizations offering resources for families in need, everything from job placement services to after-school programs to housing assistance. Marcus introduced me to a diverse group of people he volunteered with regularly, all of whom welcomed me warmly. I was assigned to help at a booth providing information about tenant rights and housing assistance programs. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I found I had more relevant knowledge to share than I'd realized. Throughout the day, I spoke with families facing housing insecurity, offering information about resources I'd researched for Brian's family but that they had rejected. During a brief break, I watched Marcus across the room, working with a group of teenage boys who clearly respected him. He was showing them something on a laptop, and they were engaged and attentive in a way that spoke volumes about his ability to connect. "He's amazing with the kids, isn't he?" said a woman who had introduced herself earlier as Diane, another volunteer. "He really is," I agreed. "Many of these boys come from challenging home situations," Diane explained. "Marcus has a way of meeting them where they are without judgment. He holds them accountable but also gives them space to make mistakes and learn from them." "That's a difficult balance to strike," I observed. Diane nodded. "Marcus says it's about the difference between supporting and rescuing. Supporting means being there while they figure things out, rescuing means solving their problems for them, which ultimately teaches them nothing." Her words echoed what Marcus had told me about his work with teens, and I found myself reflecting on how that philosophy applied to my own situation with Brian. Had I been trying to support my brother all these years, or had I been participating in my family's pattern of rescuing him from the consequences of his choices? The day was exhausting but fulfilling in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. As Marcus and I walked back toward our building in the early evening, I thanked him for including me. "It was purely selfish on my part," he joked. "We needed the help. But I'm glad you came. You were great with the families at the housing booth." "It felt good to use what I've learned in a positive way," I admitted. "I've been so focused on what this situation is costing me that I haven't considered what I might gain from it." We walked in comfortable silence for a while before Marcus spoke again. "I hope this isn't overstepping, but I wanted you to know, your brother's family found housing." I stopped walking. "They did? How do you know?" "Through the center," he explained. "There's a church-affiliated program that helps families in transition. They were placed in temporary housing last week while they work with financial counselors to get back on their feet." A wave of relief washed over me. Whatever else had happened, at least Dylan and Lily weren't homeless. "That's good to hear. Thank you for telling me." What I didn't tell Marcus was that I had anonymously donated to that very program after researching it as an option for Brian's family. I had wanted to help in a way that wouldn't enable the damaging patterns, and the program's combination of immediate housing assistance with financial counseling and accountability measures had seemed perfect. Over the following weeks, a new rhythm developed in my life. The absence of family drama was painful but also freeing. I spent more time on self-care and building connections with friends I had neglected during years of managing family crises. I joined Marcus's building community garden project, which led to impromptu gatherings of tenants sharing coffee and conversation while tending the plants. Through it all, I recognized that while I had lost something valuable in my family relationships, I had gained something equally valuable in self-respect and authentic connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. Then, about 6 months after the confrontation, came an unexpected encounter that would test my newfound boundaries. I was at a local farmer's market on a bright October Saturday when I heard a child's voice call my name. Turning, I saw Lily running toward me, with Dylan following more cautiously behind her. My heart leapt at the sight of them. "Aunt Jessica." Lily threw her arms around my waist. "I missed you." I hugged her tightly, fighting back sudden tears. "I missed you too, sweetie. Both of you." I opened one arm to include Dylan, who gave me a quick, self-conscious hug. Looking up, I saw Amanda standing a few yards away, watching us with an unreadable expression. After a moment's hesitation, she approached. "Kids, go pick out some apples," she told them, handing Dylan some money. "Stay where I can see you." Once they were out of earshot, an awkward silence fell between us. "They look good," I said finally. "How are they?" Amanda nodded. "They're doing well, actually. The transition was hard at first, but kids are adaptable. Dylan's on the soccer team at his new school, and Lily's made friends with the girl next door." "And you and Brian?" I asked cautiously. She sighed. "It's been educational. The housing program required Brian to attend financial counseling sessions. He resisted at first, but it's actually been good for him. For both of us, really. He's working steady now, nothing flashy, just a regular sales position with a consistent paycheck." I was surprised but pleased. "That's good to hear." "We're in a 2-bedroom apartment," she continued. "It's smaller than what we had, but the rent is manageable. And I've started working part-time at a dental office again while the kids are in school." "Amanda, that's wonderful." She hesitated, then added, "Your mother doesn't know I'm talking to you." "She still thinks, well, you know what she thinks." I nodded, unsurprised. "How is she?" "The same." "But Jessica." Amanda looked me directly in the eyes for perhaps the first time in our entire relationship. "I want to apologize for what happened. We were wrong to expect you to evict your tenant for us. We were desperate and not thinking clearly, but that's no excuse." Her apology caught me off guard. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. The program has helped us see how we ended up in that situation in the first place," she explained. "All the patterns and bad decisions. Brian would never admit it, but I think he actually respects you for standing your ground. It forced us to find another way." The kids returned with a bag of apples, and we chatted for a few more minutes before they needed to leave. As they walked away, Dylan turned back. "Can we see you again sometime, Aunt Jessica?" he asked. "I'd like that very much," I told him, my heart full. That evening, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was Amanda, asking if I'd be willing to meet the kids for ice cream the following weekend. It wasn't a full family reconciliation, but it was a start, a small opening that acknowledged my boundaries while allowing a relationship with my niece and nephew to continue. Later that week came another surprise, a text from my mother, brief and typically understated. "Coffee next week? Just us." I stared at the message for a long time, considering my response. Part of me wanted to reject the overture out of hurt and pride. But another part, the part that had been doing a lot of thinking about healthy relationships these past months, recognized that shutting the door entirely would only perpetuate the dysfunction from a different angle. Tuesday, 2 p.m., at Riverside Cafe, I texted back. "I'd like that." Whatever came from that meeting, I knew I would approach it differently than I had every previous interaction with my mother. I would bring clear boundaries, self-respect, and the understanding that loving someone doesn't mean abandoning your principles or sacrificing others to meet their demands. And for that hard-won wisdom I had Marcus to thank, a man who had simply stood in his own truth and, in doing so, had shown me how to stand in mine. The autumn sunshine spilled across my kitchen table as I prepared for a gathering I never would have imagined 6 months earlier. My apartment, once a quiet refuge, was about to become the setting for something new in my life, a community dinner with my building's tenants. The idea had started with Marcus's small garden project and evolved naturally as we all worked together, sharing gardening tips and stories. Mrs. Gonzalez from the first floor suggested we cook with our harvest, and suddenly everyone was planning dishes to share. Tonight would be our first official building dinner, held in the small community room I had never quite known how to utilize. As I chopped vegetables for a salad, I reflected on the remarkable changes of the past 6 months. The painful separation from my family had gradually transformed into something unexpected, a sense of peace and self-assurance I had never known before. My coffee meeting with my mother had been awkward but civil. She had not apologized directly, that had never been her style, but she had acknowledged in her own way that perhaps the situation with Brian could have been handled differently. Coming from Eleanor Reynolds, this was tantamount to a full confession of wrongdoing. We had established a tentative new relationship, one where we met in public places for limited periods of time and avoided certain topics. It wasn't warm or particularly comfortable, but it was sustainable, and most importantly, it respected the boundaries I had finally learned to establish. My relationship with Brian remained distant. He had yet to acknowledge any wrongdoing in the apartment situation, though Amanda had hinted that he struggled with pride more than actual anger. I had seen him only once, briefly, when he dropped the children off for our ice cream outing. Our exchange had been awkward but not hostile, a coolly polite interaction between adults who shared family connections but little warmth. The children, however, had become regular visitors to my life again. Every other weekend, I spent time with Dylan and Lily, taking them to museums, parks, or simply having them over to help with the garden. These visits were arranged directly with Amanda, bypassing the more complicated dynamics with my brother and mother. During one such visit, Dylan had shyly asked about Marcus, remembering him as the nice man who helped with the flat tire. I had introduced them properly, and Marcus had shown Dylan how to prune tomato plants in our community garden. The simple interaction had healed something in me, the fear that I had irrevocably damaged my relationship with my niece and nephew by standing my ground. The sound of my phone buzzing pulled me from my reflections. It was a text from Marcus. Need any help carrying things down to the community room? I smiled at his thoughtfulness. I've got it covered, but thanks. See you at 6. Our friendship had deepened gradually over these months, built on mutual respect and shared experiences rather than dramatic declarations. We had never discussed any romantic potential, both of us content with the comfortable rhythm we had established. Perhaps someday that might change, but for now, this was exactly what I needed, a friend who saw me clearly and valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. The most profound change, however, had been in my professional life. My experience with the community center had inspired me to start a small program helping first-time homebuyers navigate the complex process of property purchase. Drawing on my knowledge as a property manager and my newfound understanding of housing assistance programs, I had created workshops that were now being offered monthly at the community center. The simple act of transforming my painful experience into something that helped others had been surprisingly healing. Each time I saw the light of understanding dawn on a participant's face as they grasped a concept that had previously mystified them, I felt a sense of purpose that went beyond my day-to-day work managing properties. As I finished preparing my contributions for the dinner, my phone rang again. This time it was Aunt Rita, checking in as she had regularly since our reconnection. Just calling to wish you luck with your building dinner tonight, she said cheerfully. Though knowing you, you've got everything organized perfectly. I laughed. Hardly perfect, but it'll be fine. How are you doing? Can't complain. Your mother mentioned she saw you last week. We had coffee, I confirmed. It was civil. Aunt Rita chuckled. High praise indeed for an Eleanor Reynolds interaction. You know, I'm proud of you, Jessica. Standing your ground hasn't been easy, but you've done it with grace. I've had good examples, I told her, thinking of both her and my grandmother. After we hung up, I gathered my dishes and headed down to the community room. Mrs. Gonzalez was already there, setting up a folding table with a colorful tablecloth. Mr. Chen from Unit 4 was arranging chairs, while his teenage daughter decorated the room with paper lanterns she had made. Marcus arrived moments later, carrying a large pot of what smelled like his famous chili. The secret ingredient is dark chocolate, he whispered conspiratorially as he set it down. Don't tell anyone. Within half an hour, the room was transformed. All 4 apartment units were represented, plus a few friends and family members. Mrs. Gonzalez had brought her adult daughter and grandson. Mr. Chen's wife arrived late from her hospital shift, still in scrubs but beaming with pleasure at being included. As we settled in to eat, I looked around at these people who had begun as names on leases and transformed into a small community. They chatted across the table, passed dishes, complimented each other's cooking, and laughed at shared jokes. All ordinary actions that somehow felt extraordinary in their simple human connection. The gathering stretched into the evening, with Mrs. Gonzalez's grandson teaching everyone a card game, and Mr. Chen's daughter showing Marcus and me her college acceptance letters. When the party finally wound down around 9, everyone pitched in for cleanup without being asked, transforming what could have been a chore into a final communal act. As the last guests departed and Marcus helped me carry my serving dishes back to my apartment, he paused in the hallway. That went well, he observed. You've created something special here. We all did, I corrected him. I just provided the space. Sometimes that's the most important part, he replied. Providing space for good things to happen. His words resonated with me long after he had said goodnight and returned to his own apartment. Wasn't that ultimately what I had done in this whole situation? By refusing to displace Marcus, I had preserved a space where he could continue his important work with troubled teens. By establishing boundaries with my family, I had created space for healthier relationships to potentially grow. By starting my homebuyer program, I was creating space for others to build security and stability. The next morning, I received an unexpected text from my mother. Your father and I would like to have dinner next week. Just us. The old Jessica would have immediately agreed, perhaps with a flutter of hope that this might signal a return to the family dynamics I had known. But I had learned too much about healthy boundaries to make that mistake again. I'd enjoy dinner with you and Dad, I replied carefully. With the understanding that we'll respect each other's boundaries and decisions. Her response was slower in coming, but when it arrived, it suggested a small but significant shift. That seems reasonable. Tuesday at 7? It wasn't a grand declaration of changed perspectives. My mother would likely always favor Brian in subtle ways, and family gatherings would probably never be entirely comfortable. But this small acknowledgement of my right to boundaries represented progress I wouldn't have thought possible 6 months ago. That afternoon, I received an email notification about a donation to the church housing program that had helped Brian's family. It was from an anonymous donor, but the amount matched exactly what I had donated 6 months earlier. There was no note, no explanation, but I knew instinctively it was from Brian, his way of passing forward the help he had received, perhaps also his indirect acknowledgement of my attempt to help on my own terms. As I sat in my living room that evening, watching the sunset paint my walls with golden light, I reflected on the journey of the past year. I had lost the comfortable illusion of family harmony but gained authentic relationships based on mutual respect. I had experienced painful rejection but also unexpected alliance. I had stood alone in my convictions but discovered I wasn't truly alone after all. The woman my grandmother had believed I could be, strong, principled, compassionate without being a doormat, was finally emerging from the shadows of family expectations and patterns. The apartment building that had been the catalyst for such profound change was now more than a financial investment. It was a community where I belonged, where I had found my voice and my worth. Life would continue to present challenges, of course. Relationships would evolve, boundaries would need maintenance, and difficult decisions would arise. But I now approached these realities with confidence in my ability to navigate them without sacrificing my integrity or abandoning others' well-being. In the end, perhaps that was the most valuable lesson from this entire experience, that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful growth, and that finding your voice often means finding your home, not just a physical dwelling, but a place of belonging firmly grounded in your own values and truth. Have you ever had to stand up to family pressure for what you believed was right? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, and share if this resonated with you. Your support helps me continue sharing these life lessons. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you the courage to honor your own boundaries with both compassion and strength.